safety, this guy has been known to have explosives in his residence. The guy was weird. He was really weird.
Yeah.
Not surprised.
Hey, Daniel. Oh, it is?
Fatal.
Don't put it on the air yet. It'll just make media.
Yeah.
One or two.
Very late. One is getting transported, and one fatality.
What about the status of the other one? What's the status of the other one? Do they know? Probably stable?
Yeah, probably. Homicide, I don't know, we should probably let
That's her.
Yeah.
This key is found in the laundry room. Oh, wow, I was so close to getting him. Oh, man. I was so close. They could have picked him up and taken him out. I was so close. Well, may not have been anything you could have done. Oh, wow. I mean, that was just awful. So close. I almost rescued him. I almost rescued him.
My son was found dead. He was burnt from head to foot. He was literally cooked, nay, barbecued. She was repeating over and over, like almost in a sleep. She was repeating, I want back my son. She was saying, I want back my son. And I told her, you know that's not going to happen. Daniel Beckwitt murdered my son.
It started with smoke, not from a campfire, not from a stove, but from deep beneath the earth. Inside a wealthy Maryland suburb, nestled behind manicured lawns and brick facades, a horrifying secret was burning to the surface. Firefighters responded to what seemed like an ordinary house fire in Bethesda on September 10, 2017. But nothing about this scene was ordinary. The house, owned by Daniel Beckwitt, a millionaire stock trader and computer hacker, was unlike anything they had ever seen. Hoarding conditions made it nearly impossible to move inside. Trash and debris choked the hallways. And in the basement, something even more surreal. A crude entrance to a hidden tunnel system snaking under the property like veins in the ground. At the far end of it lay the naked, burned body of a young man, just steps from safety, yet utterly unreachable. His name was Askia Khafra, just 21 years old, intelligent, driven, a dreamer with a plan to change the world through business. But instead, he died in the darkness, trapped underground, with no clear way out. His final texts were desperate cries for help. He smelled smoke. Something was wrong, but by the time emergency crews arrived, it was too late. Askia had been consumed by the fire and the madness that sparked it. At first glance, this case looked like a freak accident, a fire caused by faulty wiring, an unfortunate death in a cluttered home. But as investigators dug deeper, quite literally, they discovered a disturbing web of obsession, deception, and paranoia.
Yeah, let's go where this whole thing first started. I don't even know where the laptop. Maybe it's under. It was on the bed right here. Hey, Daniel. One of the investigators collected a laptop. I don't know whether it's yours or Askia's or what. I don't like them. Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is way messier than it was before. Even, yeah, I mean, it wasn't in good shape before, but
So he was probably already over here, you think?
second time.
This is just the worst spot he could have gone to.
One where a brilliant but erratic man convinced another to bury himself alive in the name of survival. What was Daniel Beckwitt hiding? Why had he lured a young entrepreneur into a labyrinth of tunnels beneath his house? And how had a fire so deadly and devastating been allowed to happen in the first place? This isn't just the story of a bizarre bunker project gone wrong. It's a tale of exploitation masked as opportunity, of trust traded for control, and of a justice system grappling with the question, when does eccentricity cross the line into criminal negligence? Askia's family called it murder.
My name is Askia Khafra. I am father of Askia Khafra. Daniel Beckwitt murdered my son.
Beckwitt's lawyers claimed it was a tragic accident. The courts? Well, even they couldn't quite agree. In a world increasingly obsessed with doomsday prepping, tech disruption, and the collapse of modern society, this case was a chilling collision of all three. A millionaire with a fear of nuclear war, a startup hopeful looking for his big break, and a house hiding secrets not even its neighbors could have imagined. This is the story of Askia Khafra, the tunnels he helped build, and the flames that revealed the truth. Stay with us. Askia Khafra was 21 years old, bright-eyed, ambitious, and idealistic. The kind of young man who believed in building something bigger than himself, literally. He was working on a startup idea he hoped would one day bring him success and purpose. He was sharp, creative, and driven. But like many young entrepreneurs, he lacked the one thing his vision couldn't manifest overnight: money. Daniel Beckwitt. Beckwitt was no stranger to wealth. A tech-savvy stock trader with a penchant for hacking, he'd made his fortune online. He lived in Bethesda, Maryland, in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. On the surface, he was reclusive, but seemingly harmless. But beneath that surface, quite literally, Beckwitt was digging his own escape from the world. He feared a nuclear disaster, particularly from North Korea, and was obsessed with survival. So he began constructing an underground bunker system beneath his home, a paranoid labyrinth carved into the earth under layers of concrete and secrecy. Askia and Beckwitt met online, where their worlds briefly aligned. Askia pitched his startup. Beckwitt invested $5,000. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The business ultimately failed, but Beckwitt saw something else in Askia, something he needed: labor, trust, discretion. Beckwitt offered him another deal. Help him dig. Come work on his secret project. He'd be paid. And with Askia eager to restart his ambitions, he agreed. But Beckwitt's world was different, dangerous. Once Askia accepted the job, the line between opportunity and captivity blurred. Beckwitt insisted on total secrecy. When picking up Askia for work, he'd blindfold him with blackout glasses. He'd drive in long, disorienting loops to hide the home's true location.
Just hand him some glasses and he put them on.
What do you mean glasses?
They were just like blacked out glasses.
Like sunglasses, or they completely cover your eyes?
Completely covering.
So he couldn't see anything?
No. He was
Okay.
cool with it. I mean, I told him before he ever came, I was like, this is one of the conditions. You're gonna wear
What did you,
blind-
tell me what you said to
Oh,
him.
I just said, I'm concerned about people knowing exactly where this is at.
Online, Beckwitt spoofed the internet IP to make it seem like Askia was working in Virginia, not Maryland. Even Askia's own family didn't know the full extent of where he was or what he was doing. And inside that house, conditions were horrific. Askia lived in the tunnels for days at a time, eating, sleeping, and using a bucket as a toilet. There was an air circulation system and some lighting, but nothing met safety standards. Exposed electrical wiring hung like veins across the ceilings. The risk of fire was ever present. Upstairs was no better. The home was filled floor to ceiling with hoarded items, trash, electronics, and debris.
So if we have to do any more work in here, we'll make sure we don't do anything bad.
Alrighty.
Emergency exits were choked with clutter. A house built to hide from the outside world had also become a prison. Yet through all this, Askia stayed. Whether driven by desperation, hope, or Beckwitt's manipulation, it's hard to say. What is clear is that he was isolated, overworked, and ultimately left in harm's way. Daniel Beckwitt, for all his brilliance, was obsessed. Obsessed with survival, obsessed with secrecy. But what he lacked, tragically, was responsibility. Askia may have believed he was helping build a future, one of security, one with a financial reward, perhaps even the beginning of his entrepreneurial dreams. But what he was really building was a death trap. And when the flames came, they exposed far more than faulty wiring. They revealed the consequences of blind trust, unchecked obsession, and what happens when ambition turns into exploitation. On the night of September 10, 2017, a fire broke out at 5211 Danbury Road in Bethesda, Maryland. But it wasn't just a house that went up in flames. It was a secret. That evening, the quiet neighborhood was disrupted by rising smoke and the sudden arrival of emergency responders. Flames had erupted from the basement of Daniel Beckwitt's home, a bizarre, cluttered, fortress-like structure filled with mounds of junk, electronics, and trash. Inside was a man, Askia Khafra. He didn't survive, but long before the fire ignited, the danger was already smoldering. Askia had been staying underground for days as part of his work helping Beckwitt construct a private network of tunnels beneath the house. This wasn't just a side project, it was an obsession. Beckwitt believed nuclear war was imminent, particularly from North Korea, and he was determined to survive. His plan, a hidden bunker system built entirely in secret. He didn't hire contractors, he didn't apply for permits. Instead, he recruited Askia, a young man looking for another shot at making his dream work. In exchange for cash, Beckwitt demanded silence and full cooperation. That meant letting go of logic, letting go of control, letting go of safety. Askia followed the rules, even when they didn't make sense. He wore black glasses during pickups and endured Beckwitt's long, confusing drives meant to disorient him. Beckwitt even manipulated internet traffic to make it seem like Askia was working from Virginia, not Maryland. It was a psychological maze built alongside the physical one. Down in the tunnels, Askia worked by hand for hours, even days, carving out space in the dirt. There was ventilation, light, and basic wiring, but everything was homemade, rigged by Beckwitt himself. Nothing about it was inspected or secure. Exposed wires ran through plywood and trash. The air was stale. The tunnel was narrow, and the surface above, the house itself, was an obstacle course of hoarded chaos. Still, Askia stayed. That night, he sent Beckwitt a message from inside the tunnel. He smelled smoke. But instead of calling 911 or rushing to help, Beckwitt tried to address the problem remotely. He later claimed he activated a fan. Minutes ticked by. Smoke thickened. Then the fire surged. Investigators later determined the blaze was caused by a defective electrical outlet in the basement, likely overloaded by the tangled mass of cords and wires Beckwitt had installed without oversight. As the fire grew, Askia had no chance. Trapped in the basement, disoriented by the smoke, and overwhelmed by the hoarding conditions, Askia tried to escape. He made it within feet of the basement door, but piles of debris, trash, and obstacles blocked his way. The flames moved faster than he could. The thick smoke consumed the oxygen. Firefighters found his body, naked, charred, and curled up on the floor. He was just steps from safety. A few clear feet might have saved him. But in Beckwitt's house, even escape was buried under paranoia. The image haunted everyone who saw it. Askia hadn't been killed by malice. He wasn't stabbed, shot, or intentionally murdered. He died because someone who should have known better, failed to act like a responsible human being, failed to provide safety, failed to call for help in time. The tragedy wasn't just that a young man full of dreams died. It was that he died for something absurd, digging a bunker for a doomsday that never came, beneath the house of a man who thought he could outsmart the end of the world, but not his own negligence. The fire may have been the immediate cause of death, but what really killed Askia Khafra was a toxic combination of obsession, secrecy, and irresponsibility. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze at Daniel Beckwitt's Bethesda home, they expected to find destruction. What they didn't expect was a descent into something almost surreal. Part hoarder's den, part bunker, part tomb. The discovery of Askia Khafra's body was only the beginning. The condition of the home raised immediate red flags. First responders struggled to even navigate the interior. Rooms were packed floor to ceiling with debris, trash, and electronic equipment. Getting to the basement had been a challenge. But what did they find underneath it? That's when everything changed. Behind scorched panels and beneath piles of junk, investigators found a small opening, the mouth of a tunnel. As they entered, what appeared at first to be an amateur crawl space revealed itself to be an entire subterranean network, hand-dug shafts stretching dozens of feet in multiple directions, makeshift ventilation systems, electric lights, plywood supports, and at the center of it all, a clear sign that someone had been living down there. Askia's belongings, a mattress, personal items, food packaging, were discovered in what amounted to an underground living cell. He had been eating and sleeping there, working there, surviving there, all under the radar of building inspectors, law enforcement, and even neighbors who had no idea what was happening, just feet beneath their homes. As fire marshals traced the source of the fire, they quickly found the ignition point, a basement electrical outlet overloaded with makeshift wiring. It had sparked and caught fire, a fire that had rapidly spread upward into the hoarded space, turning the home into a death trap. Forensic analysis confirmed that the outlet had been overloaded and not installed to code. There were no circuit breakers designed to contain such an overload, just a web of tangled extension cords strung like a spider's nest around combustible materials. But the most damning evidence came from the timeline. Askia had texted Beckwitt from underground, saying he smelled smoke. This wasn't an instantaneous fire. There had been a window, a narrow, critical window where Beckwitt could have acted. Instead of calling 911 or racing to save Askia, Beckwitt stayed upstairs, claiming he tried to manage the situation with a ventilation fan. Minutes ticked by, and the fire grew. By the time Beckwitt finally called for help, it was too late. The fire department later estimated that Askia likely died from smoke inhalation and thermal injuries just minutes before they arrived. The story soon caught the attention of Montgomery County detectives. They were stunned by the level of secrecy Beckwitt had employed.
Just for your safety, this guy has been known to have explosives in his residence. The guy was weird. He was really weird.
Interviews with Askia's family revealed that even they didn't know the precise location of where he had been working.
He used to blindfold my son with dark glasses and drive him for as much as 1-2 hours way out to Manassas in Virginia. So my son was under the belief that these tunnels were out in the mountains of Virginia. And then he would give him a key lanyard to hold, but lead him into his basement with Askia holding the key lanyard and blindfolded, and he holding the other end. Take him to the hole in the ground, the shaft that leads down to the tunnel, and it's only at that point the blindfold was removed. Unfortunately, it's almost like a dog on a leash.
One of the most chilling details, Beckwitt had used a technique called IP spoofing to make it appear online that Askia was digging tunnels in Virginia, not Maryland. Investigators viewed this as more than just eccentricity. It was a deception. As the investigation unfolded, so did Beckwitt's disturbing pattern of behavior.
I just need a second. I need a second.
Neighbors described him as reclusive. Some had noticed strange activity, but had no idea of its scope.
There's been stories about that. They mentioned like a hoarding situation. Could be anything from someone survivalist in an underground bunker.
And you said the guy that lives here, what's his name? The guy who
His name is Daniel Beckwitt. He actually had explosives apparently at his house.
This house or
Not his house.
And that was where?
In Champaign, Urbana,
Illinois.
I think they kept him in jail for a while, but he couldn't have done much time.
Online, Beckwitt had a trail of writings, posts in hacker forums, survivalist discussions, and doomsday threads. He wasn't just paranoid. He was preparing for an apocalypse of his own design. Askia's family, devastated and confused, demanded justice. They believed their son had been exploited, lured into a situation that was wildly unsafe and intentionally hidden. Investigators agreed. What emerged wasn't a clear-cut case of intentional murder, but something just as insidious, a reckless disregard for human life. In April 2018, a grand jury indicted Daniel Beckwitt on charges of second-degree depraved heart murder and involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that Beckwitt's conduct, while not driven by intent to kill, showed such extreme negligence and disregard that it constituted murder under Maryland law. It was a rare charge, but given the bizarre circumstances and Beckwitt's clear awareness of the dangers he had created, prosecutors felt it was justified. The tunnels weren't just illegal, they were lethal, and one man had died as a result. The trial would test the limits of how far the law could stretch to hold someone accountable, not for a violent act, but for letting madness spiral into manslaughter. In April 2019, the case of State of Maryland versus Daniel Beckwitt made its way to the courtroom, and with it came a flood of public fascination and outrage. It wasn't just the crime that was on trial, it was the very definition of responsibility. Prosecutors framed Beckwitt's actions as nothing short of depraved. They didn't argue that he intended to kill Askia Khafra. Instead, they claimed Beckwitt acted with such reckless disregard for life that his behavior rose to the level of second-degree depraved heart murder. It was an unusual charge, one that didn't rely on motive or premeditation, but on behavior so grossly negligent it implied a hardened indifference to human life. The courtroom listened as prosecutors laid out the details: how Beckwitt kept his home in hoarded chaos, how he forced Askia to live underground for days at a time, how he manipulated his sense of location using blindfolds and spoofed IP addresses, and most damning of all, how he failed to act when smoke first began to rise. Askia had texted Beckwitt about smelling smoke. That was a moment of decision, and Beckwitt, prosecutors argued, chose secrecy over saving a life. They brought in firefighters who described the horrors of the scene, and experts who confirmed that the outlet in question had sparked due to faulty, overloaded wiring. Beckwitt, they argued, knew about the hazards but ignored them. He had, in essence, built a tomb. The defense, meanwhile, painted a different picture, one of a socially isolated man, eccentric and paranoid, yes, but not malicious. They admitted Beckwitt was obsessed with prepping and survival, and that he had hoarding tendencies. But they argued he genuinely cared about Askia and had even invested in his business. The tunnel project was presented not as exploitation, but as a misguided partnership between two adults. The fire, they said, was a tragic accident, not a crime. The defense insisted Beckwitt had no intention to harm Askia and had even paid him well for the work. They also claimed that Beckwitt tried to help once he was alerted to the smoke, including turning on a fan and eventually calling 911. This, they argued, showed panic and concern, not indifference, but the jury wasn't convinced. The prosecution's portrait of Beckwitt as a man who built a death trap, then refused to act when danger came, stuck with them. After deliberation, they delivered their verdict: guilty of second-degree depraved heart murder and involuntary manslaughter. It was a landmark decision. Convictions on depraved heart murder are rare, especially in cases without direct violence. Judge Margaret Schweitzer sentenced Beckwitt to 9 years in prison, a sentence many found lenient yet legally appropriate under Maryland's guidelines.
Now I want to let you know, second-degree depraved heart murder, the minimum sentence for that is 10 years. And I think the maximum was either 25 or 30 years. The judge at his sentencing gave him 9 years. One less than the minimum. I couldn't understand it. Here's her explanation. She don't believe that what happened rises to the level of a second-degree depraved heart murder. And because of that, this is the reason she gave him 9 years. And she praised him. She actually praised him. She said he's so bright, he's so intelligent, he has a lot to give to society. She said that he reminded her of her brother, who's a bright guy, who's a nuclear physicist. And I felt humiliated. I felt humiliated because I was a victim and he was the perpetrator of a crime. And how could you be praising the perpetrator of a crime at his sentencing? What about my feelings? Don't I matter? You know? You are praising this gentleman who did a criminal act, who 12 jurors believed committed murder and manslaughter. And then she gave him 9 years.
Askia's family, though devastated, felt some measure of justice had been served. They had lost a son who had only just begun to chase his dreams, and now, at the very least, someone was being held accountable. But the story didn't end there. Beckwitt's legal team quickly filed an appeal, arguing that while the circumstances were tragic, they did not meet the legal threshold for second-degree murder. In their view, the charge was an overreach, and in time, Maryland's courts would agree. In January 2021, nearly 2 years after Daniel Beckwitt's conviction, the Maryland Court of Special Appeals issued a decision that shook the foundation of the original trial. The court agreed with the defense. Beckwitt's actions, however negligent, however bizarre, did not legally constitute depraved heart murder. The ruling wasn't about whether Beckwitt was responsible for Askia Khafra's death. That part had already been made clear. What the court questioned was whether his recklessness truly met the legal standard of extreme disregard for human life. They concluded it did not. The murder conviction was overturned. Still, the court upheld Beckwitt's conviction for involuntary manslaughter, reaffirming that his negligence had indeed caused a preventable death. But without the murder charge, his original sentence was no longer applicable. Beckwitt was sent back to court for resentencing. In September 2021, the new sentence was handed down: 5 years in prison with credit for time already served. Given his good behavior and time already spent behind bars, Daniel Beckwitt would be a free man before long. For Askia's family, it was a brutal blow. The man whose recklessness had led to their son's death would serve less time than many nonviolent offenders. To them, the system had favored technicalities over justice. They argued that the case wasn't just about faulty wiring, it was about power, manipulation, and the exploitation of a vulnerable young man. Outside the courtroom, the case continued to spark debate. Some saw Beckwitt as a tragic figure himself, a mentally unwell recluse whose paranoia had gotten out of hand. Others saw him as a privileged eccentric who used his money and legal resources to avoid accountability. Media outlets dubbed the case the bunker death, and true crime forums lit up with theories and outrage. The surreal nature of the crime, tunnels, blindfolds, doomsday prepping, made it a case unlike any other. But underneath the strangeness was a deeply familiar truth. Workplace safety matters, and negligence, especially from those with power, can be just as deadly as violence. The case raised difficult legal questions. Where is the line between criminal negligence and murder? Should someone be held responsible not just for what they do, but for what they fail to do? And when eccentricity turns deadly, how much weight should mental health and intent carry? For Beckwitt, life would never be the same. Even after his release, he remained under public scrutiny. A man whose underground fears had destroyed someone else's future. For Askia's family, the pain lingers. They remember a son full of ambition and promise, one who believed he could climb the ladder of success, and who instead died alone in the dark, building someone else's bunker. In the end, the tunnels were sealed. The house, once a secret fortress, became a crime scene. The paranoia that fueled its creation ultimately gave way to tragedy. And in a chilling irony, the man trying to prepare for doomsday had caused one for someone else. The case of Askia Khafra and Daniel Beckwitt remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession, the limits of trust, and the lives that can be lost when safety takes a backseat to secrecy.